Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you've ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. Since 2009, our radio program hosted guest experts from around the globe sharing their perspectives, experiences, and expertise while giving you food for thought. If you can't listen live, then download and listen to any of our 300-plus podcasts in our library at texasconflictcoach.com. So sit back, relax, or join the conversation every Tuesday evening, or tweet us at TXConflictCoach.
Good evening, listeners, and we're still in the new year. Welcome to our program tonight. You know, our daily lives are filled with isms, which is an attitude, a belief, a lifestyle, or behavioral characteristic we apply to others. Common isms that we hear in our language: sexism, racism, alcoholism, right? Getting that off my tongue there, and colloquialism. In our episode tonight, Isms and Words That Help You Successfully Navigate Your Life, our guest, Bob Berlin, will give us further insight to our use of words, their impact, and what they really mean. Now, Bob Berlin, he's with the New Decision Management Associates, or simply the DMA, has been mediating over the past 45 years with over 6,000 mediations under his belt. He is an arbitrator, trainer of neutrals, coach, former judge, and a legislator. Currently, he is the vice chair of the dispute resolution section of the State Bar of Georgia. He is a national and statewide presenter. His hobby is collecting words and nuggets of wisdom that can be vehicles for a smoother life. Bob draws from an eclectic professional background in law, marriage and family therapy, communications, and teaching. And in addition to his present involvements, he is doing continuing education trainings and professional personal coaching. We're going to learn more about Bob shortly. Now, we are taking your live calls, and we already see a number of people in our studio. So if you want to speak to Bob and myself as Patty Porter, just press the 1 key during the course of our program tonight, and we'll open the lines for you, and we'll remind you again of that. We are also tweeting live tonight at TXConflictCoach, and we're using the hashtag ConflictChat, so you can also engage with us there as well. Bob, welcome to the program tonight.
Patty, thank you so much, and Happy New Year to everybody.
Yes, absolutely. We're just basically halfway through the month here, and I'm so glad that you're kicking us off, and what a great topic to do that. You're full of nuggets and wisdom, even in our planning call. It's just like you were just throwing them out. I'm like, this is great and a lot of fun. So with your extensive background and your experience as a dispute resolution practitioner and coach, you have quite the library, if you will, of these colloquialisms. And before we go into some examples of these, what drew you to teaching others about the meaning behind words and phrases?
Patty, a good question. I just realized that when I was dealing with people, first as an attorney and therapist, and then moving into the conflict resolution arena, it's so helpful to be able to condense maybe in a sentence or two something that would be a piece of gold for those listening to it. And oftentimes it was so helpful. I think of one that I chuckle at, that the second kick of the mule will not give you any more education. So something like that oftentimes will help somebody wake up to something or have the aha experience, say, oh my goodness, now I know what you're talking about. Or more importantly, if they develop it. So and when I see that, and quite frankly, I get excited when I see lots of stuff like that. I really do.
What
so
gets you
it's
excited
become a
about
passion.
What's the excitement and passion about for you on that?
Well, first of all, I feel very enriched when I see something that I grow from, because I really do believe myself to be a lifelong learner. So I feel that I'll never give up learning until I close my eyes for the last time. And when I realize that, and I see others growing from it, there's a tremendous excitement, because I firmly believe that all of us are born with the wisdom of the universe while we're in the mother's womb, and then as we go through the birth canal, we gain amnesia. And then as we grow through life, we begin to say things that, and I'm not speaking of repeating what Mom and Dad may have said to us, but, and I'm sure most everybody can tap into this, that we say things and say, good God, where did that come from? That was really sharp, or that was very smart. And the longer I live, I'm finding that some of these things are just coming out of me that everybody has. And certainly somebody who, I've been down the road, or as they say oftentimes, I've been to more than one rodeo, that I may be able to help somebody avoid some of the pitfalls that they don't have to make. So that's where it comes from.
Well, great, and I appreciate you sharing that passion. So why don't we get into some specific examples and how people can use these phrases, these ahas, these nuggets, as you call them. Where do you want to begin? Because you have a whole library. What is your passionate, your favorite one that you want to share first? And I'm sure you've got lots of favorite ones.
Well, one of them is what I call the honesty, the very blunt statements about things, where many people, in their desire to be very forthcoming to whomever they are with, intimate other or some other party, many people say, I call it like it is, and I certainly respect that. But the more, sometimes people have an attitude when they say that. They'll be very direct in their comments. And what I find is that honesty unmixed with compassion and understanding is subtle hostility. And if you think about it, there's a very dear, close personal relative of mine that is extremely direct. And when I brought it to her attention, she thought about it and said, well, they deserve me going after them like that. So oftentimes, and by the way, anything that I say does not mean it's applicable all of the time. These are not finite statements that work everywhere all the time. So if we can all just consider that in many instances, they're very appropriate. So that one is a favorite of mine. And many times I will not say it. I will just think it when I hear it. Because there are many people who do say, I call it just like I see it.
Which implies, that's their truth, right? And we know we've had many conversations, right? It's their truth. I call it like it is because it goes to their truth. It might not necessarily be the other person's truth, but I liked the second part of how you added, when you use, I call it like it is, the attitude unmixed, not including compassion, is a subtle hostility. And the thing about it is if they deserve it, if the colleague, friend that you were talking about, family member, said, well, they deserve it, the thing about it is what did they want to deliver in the message to be heard? And if there's a subtle hostility, did the person really hear the message that they so desperately wanted to deliver?
Absolutely. But
what's another one?
Well, may I add one thing to what you just said?
Absolutely.
It's with compassion and understanding. The understanding is a critical part of it. Another is a joy shared is a joy doubled. A sorrow shared is a sorrow halved. And I learned this so many times when I did marriage and family therapy, that oftentimes when you're excited about something and you share it with another, it exponentially grows, and the phrase is it doubles. And then when you share a hurt, a pain, oftentimes it becomes halved merely by the sharing. I recall a situation where it was a divorce case, very hotly contested, and there was a 3.5-week trial coming up, and it happened to be a divorce attorney, a very prominent divorce attorney, and the during the marriage, he would go on vacation, not with the family, but he wasn't alone. And when his wife decided to literally throw him out of the house, he had the clothes on his back, and that was it. And she said, "You're not getting anything because you got everything you were going to get during the marriage." And they had a 7-figure estate, a large 7-figure estate. And I asked him, "Have you ever listened to your wife tell you about her feelings regarding what she thought of your behavior?" And he said, "You don't know what kind of mouth she's got." And I said, "No, well, have you ever?" "Well, I know how she feels." I said, "Ask it again." "No, I've never asked her." So I encouraged him, and this was after 12 hours of mediation. I said, "Well, would you just listen to her if she's willing to tell you?" And he said, "Well, nothing else has worked, so this is the last thing we'll do." So he went in there and asked her, and she looked at him, and she said, "This is the first time you want to hear it." And for 29 and a half minutes, she absolutely unloaded on him. And when she was finished, and I was looking at my watch because I didn't know how long it was going to last, and she took a deep breath and said, "What do you want?" And for 3.5 hours, we separated the estate out. So she was able to vent that intensity in such a way that it was so obvious it made her feel better. And during the separation of the assets, each would periodically cry and the other would comfort, literally walk over and hold the other. I mean, the marriage was concluded. It was over. But they still became what I call co-allies because they had children and they left civilly.
And what a shift just by listening, allowing her to vent and say what she needed to do, and for him to be able to ask that question genuinely and really listen during that time and not shut her down. That was a huge shift in that conflict conversation.
You are absolutely right. Everyone just was just so moved by it. It went so well after that. And mind you, they had a 3.5-week trial projected, which I heard of in the R.J. Reynolds divorce case, the tobacco magnate. But this 3.5-week trial is almost unheard of in a divorce case.
So with these colloquialisms, now you've given us 2, and you have many more that you're going to share. What's coming to mind for me now is how do you use these colloquialisms in your work as a mediator, for example, or as a trainer? Probably definitely a trainer, but have you ever used them in your mediation practice, and what was the impact when you did?
Well, in all candor, I use it in my life. It helps me stay centered and continue to, I think, in my humble opinion, have a full life, which I believe I do. And it's so helpful if I see an opening, like many times the folks are digging a hole, and most of the listeners, and probably all of the listeners, can recognize when they on occasion have dug holes, and the more they say, the deeper they get. And it's not the hole with the mule in it that was thrown in the hole and just walks away because they put the dirt back in. But just like, oh my goodness, Mark Twain had the rule of holes. When you're in one, stop digging. And when that's mentioned on a number of occasions, I get a look that says, "Oh my God, you are so right." That's never been said, but the look gave me the impression that that's what was thought, because they immediately changed direction and moved on to something much more productive, because many folks do, as we all know, they do dig holes and continue to dig even when they realize they're digging one. So
and that's a powerful visual metaphor.
Well, I think you're right. And many times I wish I had a saying that would be just appropriate for this moment, because it's such those nuggets are able to enlighten somebody so quickly, so fast, and they can relate to it in such a way that it has meaning in their life. And I think that's the purpose of those, making the kinds of statements that will be helpful, like mediators. And I know many of your listeners are not mediators, but mediators are not really, in the traditional sense, not really supposed to give advice. And I use a third grader's little written statement that said the following: Socrates was a great man. He gave advice. They poisoned him. And this is said to mediators in the hopes that they don't necessarily give advice, but more of help the person determine what they want for their life and in this specific conflict, what they would like to see happen.
Very, very good. Before we move on, let me just let listeners know you are tuned in to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program, and we invite you to follow us on Blog Talk Radio. I am speaking with mediator and coach and arbitrator and lifelong learner Bob Berlin with the new DMA. We've been talking about some of his favorite colloquialisms and how they are these pieces of nuggets, gold nuggets, and aha learning moments that keep him centered, and oftentimes might be used not just only in his life but in his practice, or things that he notices in how conflict conversations are happening and how they can be strong visual metaphors to, like, stopping you in your tracks and saying, maybe I shouldn't be doing that, or bringing some level of awareness. Let's open the line to, we have a number of people in the studio, but let's just check in to make sure no one has a question. If you have a question, you would just want to join the conversation, if you'll press the 1 key to let me know that you do want to talk, just press the 1 key and I'll open your line for you, and we'll just give a second for them to do that if they choose to do that. Also, we'll be going to your next favorite one, Bob, in just a moment. Let me just check in with one individual I think might have, but let me just verify. Hold on. Let me open the line. Well, I believe this is Carolyn, but Carolyn, I wasn't sure if you had a comment or question. It looked like you had a question, but I just wanted to check in with you before we moved on.
Thank you, Patty. I appreciate that. I do have a question. Going back to the hostility comment, first of all, I want to make sure that everyone knows that it was not me that made that comment to him about brutal honesty. But I wonder sometimes how, when people make those kinds of comments, how they might see the reception of those comments on the other side.
Great question. Thank you, Carolyn. What do you think, Bob?
I think that what Carol has brought up is what we talk to mediators about. If there's any opportunity that we can assist one party to walk in the shoes of the other party, which leads to another one: walk a mile in the moccasins of the Indian. And in no way am I hoping I'm being politically incorrect. That's not my intent, but that's where the phrase did come from. Of course, many folks don't think too much about it in certain ways, but if you walk a mile in the other person's shoes, you're a mile away and you also have their shoes, so you may have a benefit. But what I'd like to say with the many times, if you can, people that are in conflict, if they can get and it does take a little time most often to get them to experience what the other person is experiencing. Like they say, if you'll check the history of your adversary, truly look at their history, you then most often will learn the kind of person they are, and many times that will soften them in their positions, and further, many times they'll find resolution. So it is so helpful for that to occur, because most of these isms are to help them think maybe differently than they did. Einstein said the thinking that takes you to the problem is not the thinking that's going to take you away. And I don't know if you've heard this one or not, Patty, but mediators are really, in my humble opinion, environmental engineers. We create a new environment within which a new relationship may form, so that if they choose to resolve their conflict, they may do so.
Absolutely, and we've heard that before. And I just want to go back to Carolyn's question, because I know these colloquialisms hopefully get people to think in a different way and shift. And, so when people, like in the first example about honesty and the blunt statements that people make and who are really direct, I call it like it is, and it has that, subtle hostility, the perception of the listener listening to the statement, I think it shuts them on some of those things. It shuts them down and not to hear the intended message, and that's what made me realize. Okay, so when you gave that feedback to your family member, or when you might use a colloquialism, and a lot of people use metaphors and these types of phrases to get people to stop and shift and think the conflict conversation. Was there anything more before we move on? Was there anything more you wanted to add to Carolyn's question or the perception of the listener when they hear those kind of statements?
Well, your use of the word perception, and maybe this is collaterally very timely, that perceptions trump facts. And no pun intended.
No pun intended, so, exactly. It's like,
thank you. I'm glad you chuckled. And oftentimes we deal with, not oftentimes, almost all of the times, that's what we're dealing with in conflict. Not only that, but there's the other, which we don't feel as comfortable about ordinarily, and that is lies and deceptions. Many times there are lies and deceptions, and many people will shut down immediately when they recognize that the other side is lying or being deceptive, without saying, wait a minute, what's behind that? There's a reason they're doing it. And I've seen many mediations shut down because one side is claiming the other side is lying or being deceptive, and they don't want to deal with them. So there's significant affect, just like the dominoes, because just putting an ism out there or making a statement hopefully will help clarify and get the air more calmed. Because when folks do have a conflict, they're in the presence of each other, and or they're even in separate rooms but the same building, oftentimes right below the outer skin level there can be pure rage, and if killing were legal, somebody would not leave that environment. So there's a valid reason to have, can we find ways to calm people down, to get them to look at the situation a little bit differently? Because we're dealing mainly with feelings, and it's said that, and Maya Angelou was the second person to say this, and that is, folks will not remember what you've told them or what they hear or what they see, but they will always remember how you made them feel. Mm-hmm. And if we can massage the environment in such a way that some legitimate feelings can surface, where we all can recognize we're all connected and we all want to get to love, peace, and happiness as a core goal, we just may be taking different routes to that goal. That maybe we will have what Daddy Bush called a more gentle society and maybe a better planet.
No, absolutely. Now, something you said earlier, there's actually two things that you said I wanted to tap into, and that's about being present, because in our planning conversation, one of the phrases you mentioned was called, and I loved it, I wanted you to talk about it, is being present in the present with your presence. Did you get that, Abby? She's my intern tweeting right now. Being present in the present with your presence. Say more about what that means to you.
Well, let me repeat it. Being present in the present with your presence. That, in fact, I borrowed that from ADD. I'm an ADD coach. And many folks, and most adults have about 10% of their psyche is ADD. And oftentimes we are so scattered with our focus, and that's what drives an ADD brain is focus. If they're not focused on anything, they're all over the place. And many of the listeners
I'm going to pause for just a moment because not everyone will know what ADD is. So, because we have a global audience, and that's attention deficit disorder. Is that right?
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Thank
great.
You so
Go
much.
for it. Go.
Sometimes
so
they call it ADHD.
Okay, right, exactly.
Well,
go ahead.
Most adults, 10% of their personality could be considered ADD generated. And the purpose of, and I'm using that just as I'm borrowing it from them, and that is many times we are looking and talking with one another, either having casual conversation or important conversation, and our mind is distracted in many different ways. I'm talking to you about making an appointment today, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, when I get home tonight, did the plumber come and fix the leak, and so forth and so on. So oftentimes we are not as focused singularly on what is going on. And some people say the greatest act of love you can give anybody is to truly listen to them. And many of us do not. We're a nation of talkers, even though we were given 2 ears and a mouth, which should be a clue, but it's not for most. And we speak as if we have 27 mouths and 1/4 of one ear. And then you come up with other isms such as, are you listening to understand, or are you listening to reload? Meaning, is your story running while the other person's talking? Then we have what Stephen Covey has said. First seek to understand, then to be understood. I mean, all of these neat little sayings, but most folks do not focus. And when we have our call to action, I'd like to share with the audience something that I think would be helpful for them in the coming weeks. But we're so oftentimes so distracted that truly listening to another person is not even on the table. Many of us say, well, I missed something, but I'm smart enough that I'll catch in the furtherance of the conversation as it moves along the track, I'll be able to pick it up. There are some folks, and I so applaud them, that are saying, I missed that. Would you please restate that for me? And that's so helpful. So being present in the presence with your presence is taking your total being and focusing on the other person. Leo Buscaglia, who's called the Hug Doctor, was told numerous times as he reported it, people looked at him and said, you listen too hard, meaning they're really paying attention. And then you run into the situation where you're listening and you're really picking up the full message, even though the speaker doesn't wish for you to do so. I mean, there are times that when somebody's speaking and there's a hidden agenda and you're paying so close attention you pick it up, but it's a psychology game. They don't want you to mention it even though you've seen it or heard it. So being present in the presence with your presence is fully attending another human being. I could recall, and I'm a little embarrassed to say it, but I would remember that when I would come home from the office and I would sit in front of the TV and I have the newspaper, and my wife would mention something to me, and I'd have maybe 1/10 of an ear into it and not really pay attention, and then went to marriage therapy, and then I learned a very neat thing to do. The minute she spoke, I turned the TV off, put the newspaper down, and physically shifted my body and looked at her and said, and presented myself saying, I'm ready to listen. And magic occurred. Absolute magic occurred.
And were you able to
I didn't realize I was
focused?
such a turkey. I didn't realize I was such a turkey.
So, but even though, and we'll finish up this point and start to close the program, even though you put down the newspaper, you put your full body in the presence of her speaking, do you find that sometimes your mind still gets distracted? And is there anything that you did to really stay focused on what she's saying so it didn't sound like Charlie Brown's teacher, blah, 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 right?
Yes. All right. We don't have to be exactly. I'll give you another call to action at the end. There's a concept known as rapid repeat. Now, rapid repeat is where one fully focuses on the speaker. The listener's fully focusing on the speaker. And as the speaker is speaking, the listener is repeating every single word to themselves that they're hearing. It's almost impossible to think anything else because you're so concentrated on that process. Now, it's not going to occur overnight. It took me about a month to perfect it for me. But I have done it, as a matter of fact, in every conversation I'm in, because I have to do it to make sure that I hear what's being said, not just in my professional life. But I really feel that in my personal life, it's to me, it's a sign of love to the person I'm listening to. That I really need to pay that kind of attention to them because it says to them that you are important to me. And I feel that I need to do that I was speaking to my two daughters tonight, and both on the phone, so it's even more of a challenge because I can't watch any body language. But I do repeat every single word that's said. Unfortunately, sometimes when they speak at the same time, that's even a greater challenge. I don't tell them to stop, but I try my best to hear. But the rapid repeat keeps the listener focused solely on what's being said. And there are times I will miss something and ask them to repeat it. And then certainly in mediation, when I give back what I've heard, oftentimes many times I've been told, you said it better than I did. And that's when I do the verbatim and not the paraphrasing.
Right, right. I'll have to give my husband that technique, the rapid repeat. I think he thinks I'm like Charlie Brown's teacher sometimes. Well, we are going to close, and I love talking to you, and we could probably talk a lot longer. And I want to thank you, the listeners, for showing up on our studio, and for Abby for tweeting for us tonight, and for you sharing your lifelong learnings and colloquialisms. Our listeners are very familiar with the guest giving an assignment for the week. So what do you want to give to the listener to take that next step?
I'd like to recommend very seriously, many of us, when some things happen in our life, when we look to blame others, to use words of responsibility instead of saying John made me mad or it made me mad. If you can substitute the word I for the person or the it. I made me mad. I made me upset. And take responsibility for what we've done and see if that's in any way helps to reframe somebody's life. And that's a counseling technique that has caused me to just change my life and many others. So changing the word it or names to accepting responsibility for my actions and reactions.
Okay, great. So listeners, you have your I made me feel, and then fill in the blank with the emotion, is an attempt to take some accountability and responsibility for your part in that conflict conversation. First of all, what's the best way for folks to find you, get a hold of you, and then we'll talk a little bit about some things you have going on to promote that. So what's the best way for them to get a hold of you or find you?
Well, of course, my telephone number, which is my cell number, which I always answer like the president does, 478-747-4000, 478-747-4000, or our company is the New DMA, David Mary Abel, and .com. So we're on the internet, and we're always open to and receiving calls daily, even in the evening, about anything and everything.
Okay, great. So the newdma.com, and listeners, you can also find that on their program page at the TexasConflictCoach.com. So if you forget it, you'll always be able to find and link back to Bob's website. What does he want listeners to know about things that you have going on, maybe a workshop coming up, anything that you would like them to know about something now?
Well, Carolyn and I have developed a course called Mediate to Stay Married. Many folks have challenges in their relationships. They don't want to get a divorce, or they don't want to get a counseling. And having been a therapist for a quarter of a century, oftentimes we didn't really deal with how to deal with conflict. And many times marital or couple discord comes from unfulfilled expectations, which do result in conflict. And the Mediate to Stay Married concept is relatively new and might be the middle ground, if you will, that might be of help. So we'd love to talk to folks about it, plus all of the other services that we do provide, which you commented on at the very beginning of the show.
Okay, very good. So I think that, and I know, folks, that when you go to the newdma.com, you'll find some information there. Obviously, Bob and his partner Carolyn have years of experience working in the family arena, as well as other arenas as well. Bob, I want to thank you so much for being with us on the guest and educating our audience from around the globe. What final message would you like to leave with listeners?
I would like to say thank you to you for the service you're providing your folks. What you're doing is absolutely wonderful for our society. So that's the last word I'd like to leave.
You're going to make me tear up, Bob. Thank you. That was very, very sweet and very humbling. And, again, thank you for being part of this. Everyone, thank you for being in the studio to support our program, and everyone have a wonderful and happy New Year. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you've enjoyed the program. You can find over 300 podcasts archived to listen at your own convenience at TexasConflictCoach.com, or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. To learn about upcoming radio programs and resources, sign up for our monthly e-newsletter.